Okay, so thank you guys again for joining us today in this final session of the course, in this final session of the model night at about educational projects. Today we have with us Professor Laura Cervi. She has a PhD in political science from the University of Pavia in Italy and the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And she is also a professor here at the Department of Journalism and Communication Science at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Mainly, her research interests are political communication, political discourse analysis, and the relationship between media literacy and citizen participation. So I think this will be like the perfect way to end the course with Laura. So thank you, Laura, for joining us today, and please be welcome to the masters.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Albert. Go back to your meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, so hi guys. Well, actually, I know one of you. I know it's a very small master, so I always start by asking people to introduce themselves to just know why you're coursing this master, what is your profile. So in strict little window order, I will ask Jamal to start, even though Jamal is the person I already know, but just in case. Thank you, Jamal. And nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you too, Laura. My name is Jamal Callender. I'm a dancer by nature, graduated from the Juilliard School, so my principal training is in dance. And I joined this program because I'm curious to find ways to merge my dance discipline with education, especially in communication, and how I can implement ways of, yeah, just finding that creativity between the two. So during this time, through this course, I've really learned and experienced ways that they are more connected than I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree because I'm following your project, so I totally agree. Thank you very much. Maya, we don't know each other.
Hi there. Nice to meet you. My name is Maya Hollander. I am currently an English teacher teaching English around the world. I wanted to get involved with this because I am extremely interested in the progression of technology in education, particularly AI, and how we can start to teach this subject in a way that is going to be beneficial for as many people as possible to combat misinformation, disinformation, and give people the best fighting chance to really use this as a tool moving forward for society.
Very good. Where you're from, Maya?
I'm from the United States. I lived in Spain. I just got back to the United States for a month, and then I'm moving to South Korea. So yeah, I know. It's nonstop always.
Very interesting. Yeah. And actually, I don't know why, but for some reason, I mean, of course, there's no need to say that Jamal's profile is like the very first we had in the history of this master. On the other side, we have a lot of profile like yours, like of like traveling English teacher, because normally like language teacher are very much open to innovations, etc., because you have like, of course, as I always say, you're somehow privileged because learning a language is something way funnier, or can be way funnier and way more like stressful than other disciplines. So that's why you can integrate a lot of things. So I really think that language teachers are always on the forefront of integrating technology, etc., and that's the reason. Okay, so Alberto already introduced me. Basically, what we're going to do today is to talk about something very practical. I know that you have another session with Sonia Livingstone this month, which will be completely the opposite because it will be absolutely philosophical. In my case, we have somebody else joining. Sorry. Okay, so we have Lorena. Hello, Lorena. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. See if you can introduce yourself, your profile, why you're cursing this master.
I'm a psychiatrist psychiatrist. I came from Romania, and also I teaching psychiatry at the University of Medicine. And I do this master to facilitate more communication between me and my students.
Very good, very interesting. Thank you so much. Malak?
Thank you.
Hey, long time. My supervisor. Hi.
Can you briefly introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so my name is Malak Abu Zainab. I studied communication arts, radio, TV, and film, and then and a minor in political science. And then I worked in a TV station for a few years, and now I'm doing my master's for the academic reasons to go like more deep in the education and communication. So to see what's next, if I do my PhD or what to do in the academic life.
Very good. So as said, today we're going to focus on something very practical because that's what I've been asked. So basically, we're going to focus on how to prepare a media literacy or communication education, depending on what you're interested in, project, right? So I'm going to be very practical. And of course, this is meant to be a colloquium. That is to say, stop me if you have any question. You will see it's very, very empirical based because a project is empirical based. And I hope this will help you in the future if you want to start, organizing projects, but also for your own project. Because sometimes, I mean, for your thesis, sometimes like even if you're at the end of this, just, going through every step is important. Okay. So basically, what we're going to see today is how to generate ideas for media literacy projects, how to structure and plan a project, which I know normally is the most problematic step for somebody who's not used to create projects. And then we will see best practice and real world examples. But of course, stop me at any moment, and I'm absolutely open to any question or to just open and widen up things. So you already know by the time being what media literacy is, right? So it's the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, and create media in a variety of contexts. What are the core themes of media literacy? Of course, there are as many as you want, but I always like to stress out these specific core themes. The first one being critical thinking, right? Media literacy is about critical thinking. Right? And as you will see later, critical thinking is always I believe is the topic that somehow fascinate all of us. They say most of us that got, the closer you get to media literacy, the more you want to work on critical thinking. Nonetheless, it is also the most problematic one when it comes to a project. Why? Because we always have a problem. How do you assess? How do you measure critical thinking? Right? And this is where we struggle the most, finding an assessment, find a way to assessment, but it will, I hope you will show you, there are ways, right? Then we have matters of representation and ideology, that is, say, the way communities are represented, etc., etc. The topic of fake news and misinformation. As I always say, whenever I give any speeches, I use fake news just once because I know it's a fashionable word, but I strongly suggest not to use this word because fake news doesn't mean anything. Right? Fake news have always existed. It's better to talk about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, which are, once again, this concept can be assessed and measured. Fake news, what is a fake news? I don't know, right? And finally, we're talking about media production and participation, okay? So why media literacy project matter? Now things have evolved, but when I gave this, if I gave this speech like 10 years ago, there were basically two types of project related to media literacy. One in which media literacy was just a tool to reach something else, There's to say, I don't know, I'm training students to understand media manipulation in order to be better prepared to be citizen, better prepared to be voters, etc., etc. And the other that we're just basically focusing on media. Nowadays, finally, and I hope by the end of this course, you know it, we understood and we know, and there's a wide agreement in literature that media literacy is a value in itself. It's not that we use literacy in media to get something else. Why? Because media literacy is crucial to combat misinformation. Media literacy is crucial to empower youth specifically and every form of community, specifically disenfranchised and marginalized communities. Why? Because media is the only way to get this community to basically participate, to foster civic engagement. So nowadays we don't talk about digital engagement and real life engagement. We finally, and this is exactly the core of my research, so finally I celebrate this, we know that digital engagement equals to engagement. There's no such thing as real engagement in fake or virtual engagement. Engagement is engagement, so it fosters civic engagement. And actually, media literacy is the prerequisite to have engagement, because if you don't know what you're doing with the media, you won't be able to participate properly. And finally, it's absolutely crucial to foster and encourage digital creativity and critical reflection. So that's why media literacy matters. So what is the first step when you're creating a project? That might seem absolutely obvious, but it's worth like stopping by. The first thing is to understand and have a clear idea of your audience. That is to say, what is your target audience? What is your age group? Children, teens, adults, etc., etc. Right? Why this is, of course, I know you're thinking that's so obvious, but sometimes, and even in professional project, I participate in many assessment committee with the European Union, and it's quite interesting to see how the best universities in Europe, the best research center in Europe, still really fail in understanding what their target audience wants, right? So it's really unbelievable. Like 2 days ago, this is just an anecdote, I was assessing a project for Gen Z, and they didn't even mention TikTok. And I had to say it like, hello, if you want to reach Gen Z, just forget about anything else. Go straight to TikTok. It's cheaper, it's more effective. Now, you need to do it properly, because if you use TikTok as if it was YouTube, problem, right? So it's very important to understand your age group, understand what are their problems, what they want, what they need, etc., etc. That means understanding their media habits. That what do they do with media, right? Another example which I always bring about, because it's very interesting. Most of the time in which media literacy project involve humanitarian aid, they commit the mistake of not understanding the level of digital literacy of these people. So myself, as in first person, I was involved in a project in Morocco, in Aksar, that is basically an oasis, to say it in a very banal way, in the middle of nowhere, in the Atlas Desert. So we went there with students from the UAB coming from communication to do this media literacy course, and engineers that would be there to basically create infrastructure, because of course, being in the middle of nowhere, they had like very poor internet connection, etc., etc. So we created this very I would say folkloristic PC room, because the walls of the PC room was basically made of straw, right? So it was very impressive to see. So we started giving the supposed to be media literacy course, to realize that yes, the internet connection was very poor, but all the kids, and we were talking about kids here, 11, 12, 13, they were all connected via smartphone. So we felt like, what the hell are we doing here? Like they're chatting and they're using WhatsApp. What are we doing here? Now, what is the problem? I will always remember that one of my students said, okay, let's do something, like let's start from the basics and see what happens. So she said there was a bunch of like 20 kids, all of them with a smartphone, all of them on WhatsApp, all of them on YouTube, etc., etc. And she asked them open a Word file, like to start doing something. None of them absolutely none of them knew what a Word file was. But most importantly, they didn't know actually the basic of it. That is, what is Word? Word basically it's a piece of paper in which you write things on, and it's meant to be an archive. So sometimes you really need to assess what their media habits know, because they're probably, in terms of creating TikTok, they were more media literate than myself. But then you don't know what Word is, right? So you really need to deconstruct and start from scratch and explain that basically a PC is a box for storing information, right? Way before connecting with people, way before talking or dancing on TikTok, right? And of course, the educational background is important to understand, because of course, understanding the educational background is basically to just refine what you're doing. Step 2, identify the core problem or theme. That is to say, what media literacy issues will your project address? So deepfakes, gender representation in media, news verification. So in this case, my suggestion is always to try as much as you can to link it with the Sustainable Development Goals. Right? Because are you familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So as you know, the Sustainable Development Goals are very wide, and you can just link it to become as specific as possible. Because of course, it is very important to understand what is your idea, that is say, what do you want to tackle, and understand what is the problem or the issue you want to solve. Because again, sometimes you come with a great idea, but then you realize that it's like, oof, these people know more than me on a certain level, but less on a certain level. For example, since we have many women here and a psychiatrist, so please, if you have any intake here, you're more than welcome to talk. As you probably know nowadays, Albert didn't mention it, I mention it myself now. My research basically uniquely in the last 5 years centers on TikTok, right? So I'm supposed to be an expert on TikTok. And I always say that because it's very funny. If you Google me, you will see that I'm supposed to be around 150 people that knows the most, in the academia, of course, that knows the most about TikTok in the world, and approximately around 10, 15 people who knows the most about the political usage of TikTok in the world. Nonetheless, I still don't have a clue of what TikTok is about. I'm still like completely lost. Why? Because I don't belong to this generation. So I'm supposed to be an expert, but I'm still struggling. So talking about this, as you know, nowadays we're struggling with a very interesting phenomenon, which is talking about gender representation, which is TikTok. I don't know how many of you use TikTok, but TikTok is, actually I can say it out loud, can be considered one of the safest and one of the most tolerant, one of the most open-minded environment in the world. They say on TikTok is home to the best campaign against gender violence, the best campaign for body positivity, the best campaign about acceptance. It's a very safe place for LGBTQ plus people. They say there's a very open-minded environment, and again, safe environment. You see, hate speech on TikTok is less present than it seems. But on the other side, if you look at gender representation on TikTok, we still see bubbles of like very scary things. That is say, while we have gender positivity, we also have certain representation of women that are like absolutely following whiteness, following certain stereotypes, etc., etc. So this is a very, like when we talk about, for example, gender representation in the media, in this case, gender representation on TikTok, we really need to be aware of where we're going, because there are so many interesting things and there are so many complicated things. So we really need to like just lower down our goal and like what exactly we want to reach with these people, right? So ideation techniques, of course, I always suggest brainstorming because it's the best. But I also always suggest people to use a scamper method: substitute, combine, adapt, and modify. Put to another use, eliminate, reverse. That is to say, you can come out with an idea and then you can go back to other ideas. So in the last project, actually media literacy project that I leaded at the UAB, we had, again, talking, we should go back to the audience. We had this idea of, exactly, young people are very well suited to create videos for TikTok, but probably they're not well suited in understanding the power of a video, right? So we had this amazing project in which we used a methodology created by a movie director that was very interesting. We actually went back to the roots. They say we taught TikTok using Italian neorealism. They say this is actually a very not that young, let's put it this way, movie director. So like very like with a very classical training. And he basically we created together this curriculum based on like old classic movies. And it was, of course, you can understand it was an experiment. Let's see what happens. And the idea was just teaching kids not only to like how to use the camera to create a certain effect, how to use the angle, how you can suggest perspective based on the way you use the camera, etc., but really understanding the power of like what you can do with a video, what you can express. And curiously enough, we tested this in 5 countries: Spain, Italy, Poland, Croatia, and Latvia. This is, of course, empirically grounded. It's not statistically because there are so many countries, but we were all betting. Basically, we tested with high school students. They followed this course, this training for a year, and at the end of the year, they had to create a video, and then there was a contest. So they were basically motivated to participate in a contest, and we were actually betting, like unofficially, they will absolutely do like fashionable topics, body positivity, gender, etc. Almost none of them treated this topic, and a great majority of the groups basically created video regarding histories of their own villages, cities, etc., which is very interesting because, of course, it means that there's so much more to understand, right? Because we were using a stereotype that they will do the typical thing about like how to be or bullying. No, they went to history and they went to talk. Actually, they had a great time. They went to talk to grandmothers, grandfathers, and like just discovering not history as the big history. History as is like small scale family history, like how was life back in the day, etc., which was completely surprising for us, and the result was amazing. Because as you can understand, for example, in Latvia, as you probably know, Latvia these days has exactly as many other countries in Europe is experiencing well, we have a Romanian here. She can explain it way better than me. But Latvia, among other countries, is experiencing a very scary renaissance of extreme far-right movements. So by talking, and we have to acknowledge, as a political scientist, I have to say, we have to acknowledge that these movements are very sexy and very appealing to young people. And this is something that we need to acknowledge. Why? Because they communicate very well, basically. So thanks to this project, like thanks to talking, specifically in Latvia, thanks to talking to their grandfathers, grandmothers, like old grannies in the villages, they actually went back to talk about a topic which apparently in Latvia is not sexy and is not fashionable anymore. That was anti-Semitism. They rediscovered anti-Semitism, right? And so there was no need to, push them or to invite them to reflect. They immediately did, the connection. Talking about something that has nothing to see with with current reality. Talking about memories of an old granny in a remote village of Latvia. They went back to anti-Semitism and they realized, like, oops, I know these things. I've heard this before. I've heard it in TikTok. I've heard it in social media. I heard it from the politicians. So this is the idea that just we started with the idea that we'll talk about very intimate problems, very, like eating disorder. No, nothing. They go without knowing. They went straight to politics, without knowing, because they started with like, how was life when you were 15, and they ended back with anti-Semitism, etc. So that's the idea. when you're ideating a project, just make sure that you leave like an open door to see where the project is going, because sometimes you will have better results in this way. Of course, choose your project type, format, and medium. That is to say, what are you willing to do? A workshop, a podcast, a video, a web toolkit, curriculum, campaign, and select the appropriate media, analog, digital, and hybrid. In this case, and this is a very personal opinion, but as an opinion of somebody who's doing projects, has been doing projects for 20 years. Nowadays, of course, it is very appealing to just think about social media, social media, social media. But again, media literacy, I always like to stress it out. Media literacy is media literacy in a variety of contexts. It's not just social media literacy. Of course, social media is the key ingredient of our recipe, right? As I said before, if you want to reach a 16-year-old kid, you cannot just not use TikTok. You have to use TikTok. Nonetheless, actually, going back to the project I was mentioning before, in our assessment, we of course had a lot of pre, midterm, and final assessment. What was the thing that the kids liked the most? Face-to-face training. And actually face-to-face training with, and it's quite interesting to know, language teacher. This movie director is Italian. He's in his 70s. So honestly speaking, and with all my respect, his English is less than perfect. So you can imagine, like, Latvian kids' level of English is very good, but of course not proficient. So there were a lot of like linguistical barriers. Nonetheless, what all the kids in the five nations we tested like the most was just meeting with the person, talking, and like physically doing things. So my suggestion is always just remember that people like to sit down and have a talk and experience things, etc., etc. So this is very, very important, right? Same, adapt it. In another project that I led, that was a project about mobile journalism. We had different groups of young journalists from different European countries, and we had this experience with mobile journalism, and we mix at a certain point we mixed it with real cameras. And we realized that hybrid is always the better. Why? Because this is something that seems almost counterintuitive, but it's not. Mobile journalism, that is to say, doing journalism with a mobile phone, with a simple mobile phone, is very beneficial in certain contexts. That is to say, of course, when it's difficult, like the terrain is difficult, or for example, when you are in very informal context. For example, you want to record a protest, a street protest. Of course, mobile phone is way better, because psychologically, for a protester, you're one of them, you don't get perceived as an intruder. Nonetheless, we tested this in Barcelona, and we sent one group to a protest of illegal immigrants. And in this case, mobile phone was the key to get to talk to them, because they felt safe, they felt included. So it was absolutely key, and they had amazing result. But the other group was sent to a protest, another protest, street protest. But the protest was for organized by people living in the area of La Sagrada Familia. La Sagrada Familia, for those who are not familiar with Barcelona, I'm pretty sure everybody knows La Sagrada Familia, but it's one of the most touristical places in Barcelona. And maybe this is what you're not familiar with, is probably the center of the over-tourism problem in Barcelona. You say technically, people living in Sagrada Familia are living in an impossible situation, in which literally you cannot walk your dog because you're invaded by tourists, not to mention the prices, not to mention security, etc., etc. So in this case, these people were protesting about over tourism. The group that was using mobile phone, and I'm laughing because it was kind of a funny story, couldn't get an interview, because people thought that they were kids like playing journalists. Right? So it was like, even though most of them were actually young but professional journalists, they were like, oh, no, we don't have time to talk with kids. Go away, you're playing, right? the same group, same people appeared with a Televisión Española, that is to say Spanish television, like big camera, which is very big, very absolutely uncomfortable, but everybody was stopping, and actually all the association of neighbors wanted to talk because they had this perception of, wow, we're talking to the television, so you're actually helping us. So that's the idea. They say, don't close yourself with, we're doing this on social media, we're doing this and that, because most of the time, the more you open up, the more people will learn, specifically with kids. They're so into social media, sometimes going back to like the piece of paper and writing, etc., works very well. So my suggestion is always to keep it very, very open. The project structure, this is one of the most boring part to do, but it's very important. Of course, always define clear objective and outcomes, and each objective and each outcome must be, I'm sorry to be so strict, but it's true, must be measurable. Right? And I know this is the most difficult part with the thesis. I want to research on like the effect of whatever or whatever. No, you're not doing it in 5 years. So very clear. What do you want to research? What is the output you want? Everything must be clearly measurable. Why is this so important? Because of course, this is the only way in which you can assess whether your project was successful or not. And be realistic, right? I want to increase by X%. I want to include X% of people, because if not, it's impossible, right? Same saying, create a project timeline. I haven't included examples because I'm sure that you have plenty of examples, but a project timeline, the more visual, the better, because you know what to do, right? And when a project involves many people, it is important to have a clear idea of, you're in charge of work package 1, you're in charge of work package 2, this must be done by that day. And this is absolutely important. Just to give you an idea, in the European project, that is to say, project financed by the European Union, there is a specific work package which is dedicated only to this, because it is so crucial to have somebody in charge of evaluating if everything is going well, if there's a delay, etc., because if not, it's very easy. So in this case, my suggestion is, I don't know if anybody here is working with schools. This is something, yes, this when it comes to projects, so you are absolutely familiar with that. When it comes to project, now I'm talking from the university perspective, we always have serious problem involving schools. Why? Not because schools, well, sometimes because schools really don't want to innovate. That's one part of the answer. But even when we're dealing with schools who are very willing to innovate, very open to innovation, very open to like trying new things, to participating in things, unluckily schools, and I'm talking about Europe, but I'm 100% positive that I can extend it to the world. Unluckily, schools are submitted to like strict regime of like timetable, curriculum, hours, etc. So what is the point here? I go back to the example of the TikTok videos with the movie director. In this case, we were lucky enough to have one teacher per country, that is to say per school, that would work with us for free. That is to say, they would work more hours for free just because they were interested in the project. But again, in our assessment section, all the teachers said, wait a second, I'm doing it as a voluntary work, so I'm doing it this time. Don't ask me to do it again, because I have a life, I have a family, I'm not coming back in the afternoon for free. So for school, it is very, very difficult because they have like such a strict timeline, and specifically teachers have like, this is very, very European, but again, I'm pretty sure it's the same worldwide. Like they need to be, like the history professor need to be past Caesar by November, right? So if they need to be past Caesar by November, they don't have time to allocate to these kind of things, right? And sometimes it's hard for them. So that's why, for example, in our project that we do at the UAB, we always involve English teacher, because language teacher are the only one that have some limited part of like adaptation, but that's the problem, right? So when you're involved in school, you need to make sure to just plan everything in advance, because of course with school everything gets very, very complicated, because the principal doesn't want, because blah 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 blah. right? So this is a very serious contradiction, because school should be our main focus for obvious reason, but working with school becomes more and more difficult. So in this case, what we do as university, and this is something that I always suggest, is have a backup plan of non-formal education. Non-formal education is way more flexible, because of course it's non-formal. You don't have to be past Caesar by November. So you can just open up, and there's plenty of very interesting, association that are very happy to help, etc., etc. And this is something which we're fighting for, because we always have the same answer by school: we'd love, but we can't. We'd love, but we can't, etc., etc. And of course, teachers who are participating feel somehow that they're working more than others, and it's like they do it, but then they will say stop, we stop it, right? So this is very, very important. And of course, assign roles, right? If it's group based, and in this case, if you ever get invited in a group project, always make sure, and this is something again that sounds very obvious, but it's not. Make sure to properly negotiate that the part of the project you're responsible for actually match your skills and your expertise. Because sometimes you want to do many things, but it's better if you do what you want to do, right? Because of course, and what you know how to. So this is well, I can say it even if it's recorded. I got asked, for example, a couple of weeks ago, to take part in a very interesting project about food safety. And I was very confused, because it's like, why are you inviting me? I have no clue. Because you know a lot about TikTok. Yes, I know a lot about TikTok, but I'm not a TikToker, and I have no clue about food safety. So in this case, probably it's better to get an agency, right? Not me, right? So this is, sometimes you get, I was tempted because the project was very interesting, but I had to stop and say, wait, I'm not a TikToker. I analyze TikTok, and food safety is not my field of study, and I'm very far away, so I have no idea, and I have to step out, right? So, and sometimes one of the reasons why projects succeed or not is because of the skill and the expertise of the people, right? So I'm seeing Maya saying yes. So last year, for example, I tutored a project that was amazing by an English teacher who was working in Japan. And he developed, and actually is implementing this in Japan. He realized that one of the most frequent obstacle in teaching English in Japan is something very specific, which is a sort of sense of shame that Japanese students have. So he developed a specific training. Actually, we developed together a specific training, actually focused on this specific Japanese trait, and he's actually testing it in different Japanese schools. So that's the idea, use your skills, because there are things that I really need expertise in specific fields. Because once I started working within, I have no clue. It's like, oh, shame is shame worldwide. No, Japanese shame apparently is something very specific that has to see. It's not something banally cultural. It has to see with the Japanese system. That is to say, if you fail basically in kindergarten, you will fail the rest of your life. So they're very stressed. They want to fail. So by really knowing this system, you can apply it to a specific system, right? So this is very important. Step 6, engagement and interactivity. Plan participatory element, games, discussion, co-creation. So example, fact-checking challenge or meme contest. This is fundamental, specifically when I would say fundamental for everybody, but specifically when you're working with youth. That is to say, the more youth feels that is co-creating the project, the more they will participate, right? Now I will say something that the director of this master would not agree. I am personally not a fan of gamification in education, because in order to do a proper gamification, you really need to be very, very good at that. If not, the risk is banalizing education. This is a personal opinion, and I take responsibility what I'm saying, but participation and co-creation is the key. I say, allow them to participate. Yes, Malak, please. Malak?
No, yeah, I have the same. I share with you the same point of view. That's all.
It doesn't mean that gamification is wrong. They say there are very interesting examples of gamification, but that's a risk. They say in this capitalistic world of like now something is fashionable, let's go to this direction. Sometimes gamification means banalization, not always, right? But definitely discussion. I think that the key word is co-creation, making them part of the creation. So I don't know if you're familiar with design thinking. Design thinking is one of the best tool in my opinion because it allows you to go back, continuously going back to your target audience. That you say, I propose something, go back, what do you propose? And with young people, this is key to make them feel that they're part of it, that they're part of, and they will absolutely surprise you because again, this is why I chose meme contest as an example. There is no doubt that any random 16-year-old kid is way better than me creating a meme, right? So that means allow just to basically exploit their talent because there are so many things that they can do and make the project better. And here comes the boring part, assessment and impact, right? Again, I'm using the European example because the European Union is one of the most complex system of evaluation of project, but it's more or less the same worldwide. The European Union asks every project to be assessed by the project team, by an external agency, and by the European Union. So you really need to have a clear idea from the beginning of how the project will be assessed and what is the impact of the project, right? So what are the best way to assess a project? First of all, pre and post surveys. That's the best way, right? Even with a research project. If I want to do something, I do a pre-survey asking people what they know about this topic or what they feel about this issue, etc., etc. Then I do an intermediate survey clarifying whether things are going well, if they need something else, etc., etc. And the post survey that allows you to understand whether people were happy, what to improve in the project, what to add, because sometimes you really commit mistakes. It's like, oh, I dedicate a lot of time to this topic and then this topic was not that needed, or vice versa, right? And this is something very important. Media diaries are always a very helpful tool. They can like asking people to write their own diaries and like different stakeholders. If we're working with students, teachers, students, administrative staff, so that you can see how things are going, how things are evolving. Self-assessment and peer review, right? Self-assessment is always a very good topic, and in this case, since we're in a communication education course, self-assessment is one of the hardest to implement because specifically young people completely lack self-assessment capacity. That is to say, they tend to be hyper. In this case, allow me to say, since I also teach American students, I would say that Americans are the worst in self-assessment because probably it's a matter of politeness. That is to say, if you ask peer to peer, they will always say that the other group or the other people did a fantastic job, tremendous, thrilling, marvelous, which is like, no, this is not what we're expecting here. We're expecting like a good critique, not just insulting the other, just help them out. And when it comes to their own work, they're always very self-indulging, extremely they're modest but self-indulgent. They say when I do this with my American students, they will never say 10 out of 10, but they will always say 9 out of 10. It's like, come on, right? Come on. And if you say no, maybe something else, they always have excuses. Yeah, but but because they are afraid of, right? For example, Spanish students tend to be more honest in this case. Like, oh, I admit, I didn't dedicate as much time, right? So sometimes it's a cultural thing, but sometimes it's just a matter of like teach them how to create a constructive critique. This really depends on the culture, like openly saying, this is so. For example, I don't know if any of you had an experience with Israeli students. Israeli students are very good in criticizing the other. They say they're fearless. They're fearless. They just have no problem and say this is wrong. I don't agree, etc. etc. Another culture, like maybe not agreeing, is seen as something different, right? So just this is very important to teach them, like we are learning together, right? So one thing that I do in my courses at the university is to dedicate a minimum, like a very minimum percentage on assessment. Basically, I assess the way they assess the others, so that they know that like a very small percentage of the grade is assessing how you assessed the rest of the group, right? To just motivate them to just have a thoughtful assessment, not being afraid of saying something, of course, within respect, etc., right? So this is a very interesting tool. And always mixing qualitative and quantitative methods. In this case, I started by saying surveys, pre and post surveys, but there's no assessment that can be considered completed if you don't use a qualitative methods. Why? Because of course numbers can give you an idea, but then you really need to dig deeper. So interviews, focus group, as much focus group as you can, etc. And actually, even without, like, let me just leave for a second project as in finance project, even in your thesis, if you're using quantitative methods, always rectify them using qualitative methods. Focus group, like more qualitative things, because they will allow you to have a more, a broader vision of what you've done. Maya.
I had a question about
Yeah.
the survey part of
Yeah.
this, because obviously within surveys you can have very black and white answers where it's a yes or no question, very easy to answer. But when you have something like an open-ended question, um, obviously that's not numbers related. So I was kind of curious what your opinion on that is. That still a qualitative method, or can that count towards a quantitative because you are asking this open-ended question
Well,
to get more of
technically
the
speaking,
opinion?
very good question. Technically speaking, it depends. That is to say, if I'm wearing my methodologist jacket now, right? So in your survey, if in your survey and your survey has enough numbers, you have open-ended question, this still counts as a quantitative method, because basically you quantify even if it's open-ended. Now I take off my methodologist jacket. From a practical perspective, I always suggest, like, as I believe I suggested this to Jamal. They say when you have open-ended question, my suggestion is always use the open-ended question as a map, right? So my survey in the open-ended question, my survey is about, I don't know, do you feel stressed by your appearance when you're on TikTok? Let's say. So my open-ended question are pointing me to normative body. I'm inventing now, whiteness, normative beauty. So then organize a specific focus group targeting only these topics, so that you allow people to talk and go further on that. Because these are very, I always use them as, hints. Oh, there's something interesting here. Let's take it and let's dig deeper, because, open-ended question. And once again, go back to my methodologist jacket. My suggestion is to try to keep the open-ended question to the minimum number, because from a statistical perspective, elaborating them is just a complete mess and a suicidal mission. Because of course, then you will have to do a thematic analysis. I mean, they're helpful, like, to a minimal level, because they give you hints, and then you go back or you go further, depending on what you consider, with qualitative methods, which are always the best. Because of course, if not, and sometimes,
Yeah.
this is the limit. As you can understand, I'm a fan of qualitative methods, and I'm not a fan of statistics at all. But this is the limits of statistics, because you said it perfectly. It's black or white. And sometimes out of this black or white, let's go and see what you mean by that. right? Because sometimes yes, no, let's dig deeper into that. And qualitative methods are the only methods that will allow you to reach this level, right? So maybe use statistic to have a picture, and then you take the picture and you do focus group to understand things, right? So the mixing is always better. Now, I am a fan of qualitative methods. Nonetheless, quantitative methods, specifically in projects, but not only in projects, I would say even in research, are always needed because they grant you a solid background. You know, sometimes qualitative methods, are, at least for me, are way funnier, way more interesting, but it's not enough. You know, a focus group is not enough. Now, if I have 6,000 people survey, and then I have a couple of focus group, then it's great because I have a basis, right? And this basis can be defended, right? And when it comes to project, unfortunately, agencies prefer numbers. Right, so you give them the number and then you go back to whatever you need to know, right? So for example, going back to the example of the project about TikTok and anti-Semitism, in our final report, this result that for me was the most interesting result was one line, because of course it cannot be portrayed by numbers. Like the fact that Latvian kids almost accidentally encountered anti-Semitism and almost accidentally realized that anti-Semitism is alive and kicking, and these parties are doing this in 2025 is just, this was my favorite result, and it's one line in the report, because of course, if you want numbers, then I have to tell you that 55.5% of the people were happy with whatever, the curriculum, right? But now as you can imagine, now I'm writing the article and it's all based on this part. I mean, I don't care about if they were happy about 45 minutes lessons. I mean, of course it's important to know, but this is way more important. So mixing is the best way so that you can basically keep everybody happy, but from qualitative you get way better results, specifically when we're dealing with media literacy, of course.
Yes, if you have time, this is, I would really love to continue this conversation, even in an email or something, because this has been very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so let's say here, if you want to, if for the rest it's okay, if you want to share your project or your doubts here, I think it's interesting for everybody. Would the rest agree?
Yeah, this is exactly my thesis and what I'm doing. So
if you can explain,
very helpful.
I think that these exercises are always very helpful to everybody. So what is your thesis about and what are your doubts?
So my thesis is I'm developing a training program for educators to teach high school students AI curriculum, specifically media literacy for AI.
Yeah.
And I have, at this point, developed what I think the training program should have, and I've done my survey with educators. I'm working to get expert opinion interviews for my qualitative aspect of this. My survey has both open-end and black and white questions as well. Where I'm starting to try and understand is the assessment part of this. I'm wondering if I'm taking on more than I can, or I'm taking a bigger bite than I can actually chew. But the assessment piece of this, the progression of, I have this program, but I want to create a way to assess whether it was successful. And I'm not 100% sure how I wanted to do that. I liked the idea of that survey aspect of it, but I would be kind of curious to hear opinions on that.
Well, I think that here it's very easy between brackets. They say you have to, the first thing is do a pre-survey to understand what you're like, theorize, you're not doing it properly, but to understand what your student know about the specific topic of your course. And then you will have a post-survey, like understand if they've learned, like your curriculum will have objectives, like by taking this course you will learn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so like understanding whether they have learned. and this is one part. And then they can have, you can have like a more qualitative about whether they missed something, they like the way the curriculum was done, they needed more time, less time, etc., etc. But in terms of goal, like you have objectives. By the end of the course, you will learn this, this, and that, and you can just test it with a test.
Yes, as far as the curriculum goes, I think I have a basic outline of exactly what you said. Where I was not confused, but the training program for the educators, because that's something that I'm developing as well. So obviously we have to have the curriculum for them to be trained on. So I'm kind of creating both of these in tandem.
Yeah.
So the program part of it is more where I was trying to
Are you piloting
understand.
or not? Are you piloting it or not?
Sorry, one more time. I couldn't
Are
hear.
you piloting it or not? Are you testing it on some professors or not?
Not currently, no.
Okay, so but actually it's the same. It doesn't matter if the audience is the final user or the professor. Same. By after taking this course, you will be able to do this, this, and that. And then like asking them if they need more. Like in this case, the qualifier is even more important. Like, did you feel that this curriculum fulfills your need, etc., etc. Because I don't know exactly what your audience is, like which professor will take this course.
It's aimed at high school educators, secondary school.
But like, do you have a specific profile in mind, like maths professor, informatics professor?
I see. I actually would like this to be its own course. If it's going to be part of a technology course or part of an IT course, if it was going to be integrated into something that currently exists. If it's not possible to be its own course, then I would integrate it into an IT course in high school.
Yeah, because in this case, I mean, we go back to the first slide, know your audience, that is to say.
Yes.
Now I'm using a very Spanish perspective because it's the only perspective I have. But you know, in Spanish high school, you have like the IT whatever professor, because it's not even a subject called IT. You can have like a very young, for example, PhD student, right? That is teaching in high school to make some money, which will probably be very open and very reactive and very knowledgeable about this topic. But you also have the old school, old maths teacher that have no idea, and it will just be very, very, you know, actually, I say it out loud, against this kind of thing, like, leave me alone.
Yes,
do that.
Yes. My survey gave me a lot of that. Quite a few teachers at that level are, the older ones definitely did not. They were not excited about this, and they weren't interested in training, which is what this is. So, I was going to address that as well.
Exactly. So this could be probably one of the issue, that is to say, should we only select a certain profile or everybody, or like, because you know, I'm thinking, and now I'm sorry, I'm using a very old school stereotype, but I'm thinking about I'm Italian, so the Italian teacher in Italy has like a very clear profile. She's a middle-aged woman who use a lot of Latin words, who reads a lot of ancient literature, like AI. Like, what are you talking? They wouldn't even understand the first part of it, not because they can't, because they don't want to.
Yes.
Ideologically, to say it in a way, right? So probably that could be something that could, like, ask them, do you feel interested, or like what tool can I use to interest you? I would suggest to go to the science professor, because of course, like, humanity professor would probably, or not, I don't know, or maybe creative. That's the idea. Mixing quality and quantity is this, like, quantitative, have you learned this? Yes, no. Qualitative, did you feel okay? Do you need more time, less time, more social media, less social media, more face-to-face, less face-to-face, something like this? That could be.
No, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question about this? No? Okay, so we're almost out of time. Very quickly. Real life case study. Once you do project, like let me allow me to use you as an example. So if you're doing AI curriculum, I'm pretty sure that there's another AI curriculum in the world. So always benchmark. Benchmarking is key. And it's okay to copy as long as it's not copyrighted, right? Copy means there is a great project done in Bangladesh. I adapt it to my Spanish students, right? So always use a successful media literacy project as reference because there are so many, and sometimes you can just take something, change the topic or whatever, because there are so many that are working, and this is very good. And actually, it's very, again, I'm using the European example, but it works more or less the same. It is very well valued that you based your project out of existing projects. It's not, oh, I'm copying. It's actually well valued. Okay. What to avoid? Too much content, not enough focus. And this is, Maya, I would strongly suggest you to apply it to yourself. That is to say, yeah, it's true. Sometimes if you want to just, wow, I want to do like typical thesis of this master. I want to fight this information. You have 6 years and 20,000 million, billion, actually. Let's talk, right? So let's be the more specific, the better, right? The more specific, the better, because you're doing something very small and this something very can actually evolve. Lack of interactivity in terms of course, interactivity in terms of synergy of different media and interactivity with your audience. Unclear outcomes. Again, the outcome must be clear. By the end of the course, you will learn this, this, and that. And again, I know that when it comes to critical thinking, it's very hard because how do you measure? But for example, if the focus is clear, then even critical thinking can be clear. Right? They say if the focus is on something very, very specific, then you can measure. Like I taught you how to understand when a politician is using a populist discourse. Okay, test. Can you test or can you select which one is using a populist discourse? That's very, it seems difficult, but sometimes it's easier than it seems. Of course, if I want to teach people how to debunk political discourse, then forget about it. But if I want to do something very specific, then you can do it. And of course, and again, and I'm saying, and I'm repeating again, because I see it a lot, not adapting to the target audience, right? This is key. You are, and in this case, going back, sorry, Maya, to use it as a, as an example, but again, if your target audience is actually not interested in understanding AI because they have too much work, they have too much to do, this is a problem, right? So understanding if you're, and that doesn't mean, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that your curriculum will not work. It means that you need to find a way to sell it in a better way. Right. And this is, I'm always going back to professor, with all my respect for professor, because sometimes they are very, professor can be the best stakeholders to work with, but they can also be the worst. And it's not because of their fault, it's because of the way they have to work. They say, again, there's no economical benefit involved, so of course they will say no. Of course, we cannot expect people to work for free. Right? So if your experiment, your course, whatever involves me to work for free, no, thank you. I have better things to do, right? Sometimes they are scared. In the case of technology, it's very clear. They're scared. Why should we? I have to confess, in my classroom, I have, of course, the touchpad, etc., but I always ask for a dear old blackboard, because there are certain things that I prefer doing in a blackboard. So I'm the alive and kicking example of that. Like I say, if you ask me to choose, I prefer to have only the blackboard. Of course, it's better to have both, but sometimes they're just afraid of new things, right? And I believe that in your course, Maya, you're dealing with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is posing a lot of challenges, Sometimes they're easier than they seem, way easier. as I always tell my students, I detect ChatGPT in 3 seconds, and I don't need a very sophisticated AI detector. ChatGPT, by the time being, is still stupid. So you definitely see the structure of ChatGPT. Plus, again, by the time being, ChatGPT invents references. So this past semester, one of my American students cited an article, and it was so lucky that the article was supposed to be written by my best friend. So just by reading the title, I knew that this article doesn't exist, but just in case. So I basically took the phone and I asked her, and she was yelling, as you can understand. And unfortunately for him, not only was a topic that I know very well, it was supposedly written by my best friend, right? So it happened. So it's not that difficult to detect it. It will become more and more difficult, of course, but that's the point. Sometimes for teachers, like, this is just a problem. Don't include this, right? So I know that there's a lot of effort of including like a positive use of ChatGPT, yes, but expect teacher to say no, let's just banish it, right? Same is with mobile phones, right? We do a lot of interesting things with mobile phones, but as you know, Italy just banned mobile phone in high school as of 2 days ago. Finland has done the same. So it's very complicated because there are like, I don't want to talk about ludism, but there are forms of ludism because people legitimately say, you know what, forget about it. Let's go back to real school in a way. So that's important to have a clear idea what your target audience wants, what your target audience needs, right? And sometimes you can give them an unpleasant pill, but you need to find a way to sell it in a fun way, right? So for example, with kids, I go back to my example, contests are always very good, like a video contest. And what did they win? A trip to Brussels in my case, right? That's not a big thing, but like there was a big ceremony and it was very good for them to be there and just be awarded and see what other people have done, So sometimes it's very small things, but it can work very well. Resources and tools, of course, in terms of platform, there are so many that I cannot even name them, and probably you know way more than me. In terms of toolkit, my suggestion is always rely on official documents, specifically UNESCO Meal Curriculum, the European Union Directive, which is, it seems that I'm doing an advertising for the European Union, but it's true. When it comes to media literacy, the European Union is at the top. So you always rely on the European Union. There are many other interesting things, but the European Union is always the best. So just you always use like official documents because you will find a lot of resources, a lot of inputs, a lot of inspiration. And then we're running out of time. So if you want, I will send you some examples via email. Do you have any question, any comments?
No, don't have any. You're great.
Yes, thank you. I will be reaching out later so I don't take up more time.
Thank you so much. So if you have any question, you have my email. It's in the module. No, I don't know if you have my email in the module, but you can contact me via campus, or you can ask Alberti. Is more than allowed to give your email. So if you need anything, I will be more than happy to help you out. Okay.
I can put it
Thank you very
in the
much. It's
chat
been a
for
pleasure to
everyone.
know you.
I'll put it in the group chat, Maya, for you now.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you and good luck with the thesis.
Ciao, thank you.
Bye
Thank you very
bye.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.